The storm rolled in just as I passed the faded sign for Black Pines Motel. Rain slicked the cracked asphalt, turning the neon vacancy into a bleeding smear. I hadn't meant to stop there. I'd planned to push through another 50 miles, but the wipers barely kept up with the sheets of water and the two-lane road was starting to flood. The office smelled of old coffee and damp carpet. A man behind the counter, thin, with a smile that didn't fit his tired eyes, slid a tarnished brass key across to me. "Room 8, he said, voice low and deliberate. "Keep the curtains shut at night." I laughed nervously, assuming it was a joke, but he didn't return the smile. I signed the register. Lena Ward. Mine was the only name on the page. Room 8 was a narrow cell of peeling wallpaper and heavy furniture. The rain drummed on the roof, steady as a heartbeat. I unpacked only what I needed: a toothbrush, a paperback, a change of clothes. My phone had no service, so I set an alarm for dawn and curled under the stiff quilt, grateful for a roof. Somewhere between waking and sleep, I heard it, a faint tap against the window. Then another, deliberate, like fingernails on glass. I sat up, pulse racing. The curtains were drawn tight, just as the clerk had advised. I told myself it was a branch or the rain shifting, but the taps grew into a slow drag, scraping from one end of the window to the other. When I finally gathered the courage to look, I only lifted a corner of the curtain. The parking lot was empty except for my car and the clerk's truck. And then I saw the marks. Long, wet streaks on the outside of the pane, as though someone had pressed their hands flat against it and slid them down. I let the curtain fall. Sleep never really came back. I lay awake, listening to the storm and the occasional shudder of the walls, counting down the hours until daylight. By morning, the storm had eased, leaving a heavy fog clinging to the motel. The pine trees were so dense they seemed to swallow the road. I tried to convince myself that the strange marks on the window were just runoff, maybe the shape of dripping rain distorted by shadows. The clerk wasn't in the office when I stopped for coffee. Only a steaming mug sat on the counter, half drunk, as if he'd stepped away mid-sip. I called out a few times, then gave up. The silence was too deep, like the walls were holding their breath. I drove into the next town for breakfast, grateful for the chatter of a diner and the warm smell of bacon. The waitress raised an eyebrow when I mentioned where I was staying. "Black Pines?" she said. "That place is odd. Folks don't stay there long." When I asked why, she only shook her head and went back to the coffee pot. By dusk, the fog had thickened again. The motel sat in a pocket of gray, its windows dull and lifeless. I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. I'd just started reading when the sound came. Faint footsteps moving along the hallway outside my room. Slow. Measured. I froze, holding my breath. They stopped right outside my door. I waited for a knock. None came. Instead, a shadow crept across the thin line under the door, blotting out the faint light from the hall. Whoever it was stood there a long time. Finally, I spoke. "Hello?" My voice cracked. Silence. Then the shadow shifted, and the steps moved away, impossibly quiet for the old wooden floor. I forced myself to wait a few minutes before opening the door. The corridor stretched empty in both directions. The air smelled faintly of damp pine needles and something sour, like old milk. Back inside, I tried the television for background noise, but it hissed static no matter what button I pressed. I shut it off and pulled the chair from the corner, wedging it under the doorknob. Around midnight, I must have dozed off. A thud woke me, soft but heavy, like someone dropping a bag on the floor. My heart hammered. The sound came from the bathroom. I crept forward, every step an argument with myself. I reached out and flicked the light switch. The small tiled room was empty, except for the mirror. A single word was written in the condensation, though I hadn't showered. Leave. The letters began to run, dripping down the glass as if melting back into nothing. That was enough for me. I threw everything back in my bag and spent the rest of the night sitting on the bed, staring at the bathroom door, waiting for sunrise. Dawn brought only a thin gray light and the smell of wet earth drifting through a crack in the window frame. I hadn't slept. Every time my eyelids sagged, I imagined the mirror writing new words, or the footsteps returning. I packed with shaky hands, determined to leave. But when I stepped outside, the world was swallowed in fog so dense it looked solid. The motel parking lot stretched only a few feet before dissolving into a wall of white. My car sat slick with dew, but the gravel drive was gone, hidden under mist like cotton. I climbed in and turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died. I tried again. Nothing. My phone still showed no service. Back inside, I marched toward the office, half ready to demand a ride or a phone call. The hallway was longer than I remembered, lined with doors I swore hadn't been there before, 3, 5, 7, all the way to 13, though I knew Black Pines had only 8 rooms. At the end of the corridor hung an old framed map of the motel, a tiny red dot marked, "You are here." But it hovered over a place labeled Caretaker's Quarters, not Room 8. I turned to go, only to find the hall behind me dimmer like the lights were being dialed down. A cold breeze slid past carrying a faint whisper, a man's voice too soft to make out but close to my ear. Panic clawed up my spine. I ran back to my room, slammed the door, and shoved the chair under the knob again. For hours I sat on the bed staring at the dark TV screen. Around 3 p.m., a steady knock began on the other side of the wall. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, coming from the room next door. But the clerk had told me I was the only guest. I pressed my ear to the wallpaper. The knock stopped. Instead came a low humming, like someone crooning a lullaby through water. The humming grew louder, vibrating through the floor. The bulb in the bedside lamp flickered, then burst with a sharp pop, showering glass. I bolted for the bathroom, slamming the door behind me. Inside, the air felt different, too warm, almost humid. The mirror was fogged again, though the light above it was out. This time, instead of a word, an image was traced on the glass, a rough outline of a figure standing at the foot of a bed. My bed. Something scraped softly at the bathroom door, a slow drag from top to bottom. Then a voice right outside rasped, "Room 8 isn't yours." I pressed my back to the tiles, gripping the sink so hard my nails left crescents in the porcelain. I don't know how long I stayed there, minutes or an hour, before the scraping ceased. When I finally stepped out, the room looked normal again, but the air smelled faintly of mildew and rot. The chair was no longer wedged under the knob. It had been set neatly beside the bed. Evening crawled in, thick as tar, and I realized I hadn't seen the clerk since the first night. The office lights were off, the blinds drawn. The parking lot was still wrapped in fog, though a faint orange glow pulsed deep inside the trees, like a lantern moving slowly among the trunks. I needed answers. I searched the drawers in my room, finding only brittle motel stationery and a cracked Bible. In the wardrobe, behind a stack of spare blankets, my fingers brushed a brittle envelope wedged against the back panel. Inside were yellowed newspaper clippings. Headlines shouted through faded ink. Black Pines motel owner found dead. 1978 family disappears in motel tragedy room. 8 sealed after incident. The stories told of a caretaker, Harold Muir, who had lived on the property. Guests claimed he watched them sleep through cracks in the walls. One winter, after a storm stranded a family, he'd broken into room 8 and slaughtered them with an axe. The motel closed for years, reopening only after extensive renovations. My stomach twisted. I dropped the papers and backed away, hitting the bed frame. That was when I heard it again. Humming, faint but insistent, coming from inside the wall behind the headboard. It rose into a jagged croon, then stopped with a sound like someone dragging metal over wood. I grabbed my bag, bolted into the hallway, and headed for the exit. But where the front door should have been was only more corridor, stretching into shadow. Doors lined either side, each bearing a tarnished brass plate that read 8. I spun in circles, heart thudding. The hall swallowed my footsteps, thick with a smell of old smoke. At the far end, a figure stepped into view, tall, shoulders crooked, face hidden beneath a brimmed hat. "Hello?" My voice came out small, trembling. The figure tilted its head, then started forward. Its boots made no sound, but the lights overhead winked out one by one as it advanced. I ran, yanking at random doorknobs. All were locked except one halfway down. I shoved through, slamming it behind me. Inside was another room 8, identical to mine but wrong in the details. Wallpaper rotted, mattress stripped, rust blooming on the sink. A single chair sat turned toward the door, waiting. I backed into a corner, clutching my bag like a shield. The doorknob rattled once, twice, then stilled. From somewhere beneath the floor came a voice, faint and hollow, whispering words I couldn't understand, except for two. Stay forever. The room smelled of damp ashes. My breath came in ragged bursts as I pressed myself tighter into the corner. The walls seemed to lean closer, as if the building itself were alive, waiting. A soft creak sounded from the ceiling. Dust sifted down, coating the ruined bed. Slowly, a square panel slid aside, revealing a black void above. Something moved inside it, a pale hand, long-fingered, reaching. I bolted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The knob turned uselessly, locked from the other side. Behind me, the hand retreated, replaced by a face peering from the darkness. Hollow eyes, a mouth too wide, grinning. "Room 8 belongs to me," it whispered, the words scraping like a blade on stone. The lights blinked out. Only a faint orange glow seeped through the crack under the door, casting the shadow of boots on the warped floor. They stopped just beyond the threshold. Then the voice came again, lower, almost gentle. "You checked in, Lena. That means you stay." The temperature dropped so fast my breath fogged. I could hear water dripping, steady and slow, though the sink was dry. Something heavy dragged along the hallway, pausing outside my room. Desperation clawed through me. I hurled my bag at the window. The glass didn't shatter. Instead, it rippled like the surface of a pond, reflecting not my room but another. A dim chamber where a woman huddled on a bed exactly like mine. She looked up, and I realized I was staring at myself. The reflection smiled, lips twisting unnaturally, and beckoned. The window bulged outward, thin as skin, pulling at me with invisible hands. I fought it, digging my nails into the floorboards, but the suction grew stronger. Whispers filled the room. Dozens of voices pleading, warning, laughing. Shapes stirred within the walls, faces pressing through plaster like wax figures. "Let go," they hissed. "Join us." My fingers slipped. I screamed as the window swallowed me whole. For an instant I was nowhere, drifting through cold silence. Then I stood again in the parking lot, dusk settling over black pines. Rain drizzled on my shoulders. My car waited where I'd left it, engine humming as if ready to go. Shaking, I climbed in and drove without looking back. The road unspooled beneath my tires, fog thinning with every mile. Only when I reached the highway did I dare glance in the rearview mirror. The motel was gone. In its place loomed a solid wall of pines. Relief fluttered through me, until I noticed the brass key still clutched in my fist, its tag reading Room 8. That night, in a brightly lit motel 2 towns over, I set the key on the nightstand and tried to sleep. At 3:16 a.m., a tap came at the window, gentle and deliberate. I didn't look. I wasn't supposed to stop in the desert that night. The GPS said I had 3 more hours to reach the city, but the road had dissolved into darkness, and my eyelids felt heavier with each mile. I hadn't seen another car since sundown. Only the occasional flicker of lightning far beyond the mountains, silent and distant. That's when I saw the sign. A pale neon glow rising from the dust, the glass motel, vacancy. The letters blinked in uneven rhythm, like the building was breathing. I slowed, turning down a gravel path lined with skeletal yucca plants. The motel crouched against the desert floor, its windows catching the headlights and throwing them back. Too clean, too perfect, like rows of mirrors staring at me. Inside the office, a bell rang when I pushed open the door. A woman stood behind the counter, her face reflected in a wall of old, fogged glass behind her. She looked about 60, hair silver, voice soft. "Long way from anywhere," she said. "Just passing through," I replied. She handed me a key on a cracked leather tag. "Room 7, only one rule. Don't open the curtains after midnight. The mirrors attract things when it's dark." I smiled weakly, assuming it was a joke, but her eyes didn't move with the smile. Room 7 was at the far end. The door creaked, and the light inside flickered once before holding steady. The room was spotless, too spotless. A bed tucked tight, a single lamp, and a wide mirror covering the wall opposite the window. For a while I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the hum of insects outside. I tried not to think about the argument I'd left behind, the voicemail from my brother still playing in my head. "You can't just disappear every time something goes wrong, Eli." Maybe I could. Maybe running was all I had left. When I turned off the lamp, the room reflected faintly in the dark glass, every line doubled, blurred. I closed my eyes, but just before sleep took me, I saw a movement in the mirror. Not mine. At first, I thought it was a trick of the headlights outside and a flicker passing through the glass. But the parking lot was empty, swallowed by night. I sat up, every muscle buzzing. The mirror still showed the room, the bed, the lamp. But the reflection of me was gone. In my place stood someone else, a man, or something shaped like one, half shrouded in static blur, as if the glass couldn't decide whether to keep him there or let him vanish. He stood where I should have been, head tilted slightly, watching. My voice cracked when I whispered, "Who's there?" The reflection smiled, faint and wrong. Then the lights went out. I scrambled for the lamp, found the switch. It buzzed, then glowed weakly. The mirror was empty again. Only me now, wide-eyed, trembling, pretending it hadn't happened. I slept with the bathroom light on because silence in the desert isn't peace, it's pressure. Morning light burned the horizon orange. I almost convinced myself I'd dreamed it. At the office, I found the woman watering a cactus by the window. "You said not to open the curtains," I told her. "What happens if you do?" She looked up slowly, eyes pale as uncut stone. "Glass doesn't just reflect light," she said. "Sometimes it remembers what's been seen through it. Sometimes it keeps faces that shouldn't stay." I laughed nervously, waiting for the punchline that never came. She just turned back to her plant and whispered, "Most people don't last 2 nights." I spent the day driving aimlessly, dusty service roads, sun-baked silence, radio static whispering through the speakers. By dusk, I found a burned-down gas station, its sign still swinging faintly in the wind. Someone had written on the side of the pump in chalk, "Look away when they move." I drove back before the sun dipped completely, pulse crawling. That night, the desert wind hissed through the vents. I sat on the bed, trying not to look at the mirror, but my own reflection seemed restless, breathing slower than I did, blinking too late. Then came a sound, a faint tap, tap, tap from inside the glass, like knuckles on hollow wood. I leaned forward before I could stop myself. The reflection leaned closer too, but its mouth began to move, silently forming words. I couldn't hear them. I didn't need to. The shape of the mouth was enough. "Help me." My throat went dry. I reached out, the tip of my finger brushing the cold surface. Something touched back. A warmth, faint and human, pulsed from behind the glass. I stumbled backward, tripping over the chair. The lamp flickered violently, shadows crawling up the walls like spilled ink. The reflection didn't follow me. It just smiled again, wider this time, the glass trembling like it was struggling to hold him in. When I finally gathered the nerve to pull the curtain shut, I realized it was already closed. The mirror had been shining by its own light. I didn't sleep. Not really. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the reflection's mouth move again. The same silent plea, "Help me," looping behind my eyelids. By dawn, I'd convinced myself it had to be some kind of optical illusion, my brain trying to draw meaning from shadows and exhaustion. Still, I needed answers. The motel's office was empty when I walked in. A fly buzzed against the dusty window, wings ticking like a clock. The guest ledger sat open on the counter. Only 2 names were listed for the past 6 months, mine and another written 3 weeks earlier in slanted, shaky handwriting, Daniel Rains, room 8. Room 8 was next to mine. I stepped outside, squinting against the sun. The hallway shimmered with heat, the air smelling faintly of copper and ozone. When I reached room 8, the door was locked. But the window blinds were half open, and through them I saw the faint glint of glass. Not a mirror, shards. The room inside looked like it had been gutted. Furniture overturned, mattress torn open, glass littering the floor like ice. The largest mirror had been smashed, each piece reflecting the same scene from a different angle. The doorway, my face, the desert stretching behind me. And in one shard, a man's eye blinked. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the curb. My breath came fast and uneven. When I looked again, the shard was still. Just sunlight. The woman from the desk appeared silently beside me, as if she'd been standing there all along. "You shouldn't be near that room," she said. Her voice was gentle, but her hand was trembling around the keys she held. "What happened to him?" I asked. She didn't answer, just turned toward the hallway whispering, "Reflections are only safe while you believe they're yours." I wanted to leave right then, drive until the sky changed color, until the road forgot my name. But guilt, that old parasite, kept me anchored. The reflection's plea echoed in my head. Back in my room, I noticed something new, a faint hairline crack running across the surface of the mirror. It hadn't been there before. When I leaned closer, I saw something move inside the split, like a shape pacing in a narrow space, trapped. That night, the tapping returned. Soft at first, then faster, urgent. I stood frozen as a faint whisper leaked through the glass, not from the reflection this time, but from behind it. It sounded like my brother's voice. "Eli, it's not too late." My heart stopped. "Aaron," the voice repeated, clearer this time, desperate. "Eli, get me out." I took a step forward. The reflection shifted again, but now there were 2 of them, the stranger and my brother, both pressed against the inside of the mirror, their palms flat to the surface, faces flickering in and out of focus. I couldn't breathe. "You're not real," I whispered. They spoke in unison, a low chorus vibrating through the room. "Neither are you, not here." The lights blew out. For a moment, the only thing glowing was the mirror. A dull, silvery pulse, like a heartbeat trapped inside. I ran. Out the door, down the gravel path, barefoot and shaking. But when I reached the lot, the desert stretched endlessly in every direction. No road, no car, just the motel lights burning like tiny stars scattered across nothing. The world had folded in on itself, and I was still standing in room 7. I don't know how long I stood there, trapped between running and waking. The air felt too thick, the walls too close. The mirror hummed, low and alive, like something breathing just behind it. Then came the whisper again, not from one voice but dozens. "Help us. Stay. See?" The glass rippled like water. Faces bloomed across its surface. The woman from the office, the man from room 8, my brother Aaron, their features flickering between memory and static. I reached for the doorknob, but my hand met a wall that hadn't been there before. The exit was gone. The mirror brightened. Its glow spilled across the carpet, crawling up my legs in cold ribbons of light. I screamed and stumbled back, but the floor had vanished beneath me. I was falling forward, not into the room, but through it. I landed hard. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the motel anymore. Or maybe I was. But it looked wrong. The hallway was inverted, stretching endlessly in both directions. Every surface gleamed like silver, reflecting reflections that multiplied forever. Each one showed a different version of me. Older, younger, terrified, smiling. One of them mouthed, "You never left." I turned around. There was the mirror again. Only now I was on the other side. The real room lay beyond it, dim and still. My reflection, or whatever was pretending to be me, stood there, blinking slowly, curiously. It looked at me the way you'd look at something you weren't sure you'd imagined. Then it smiled, just enough to make my stomach drop. "Eli," it said in my voice, "you can rest now." It turned away, sat on the bed, and exhaled like a man waking from a long dream. I pounded on the glass, screaming. The sound didn't carry, only the dull, hollow echo of my own panic. Behind me, I heard footsteps. When I turned, I saw the others, the ones who had come before. Dozens of them drifting in silence, their faces pale, their eyes blank as mirrors themselves. The man from room 8 was among them. He raised a trembling hand toward me and whispered, "Every reflection is a door, but once it opens, it needs someone to take your place." And then I understood. The motel wasn't real, not in the way I thought. It was a crossing point, a thin space between the living and the remembered. Every mirror in it was a threshold. Every guest was a reflection waiting for release. And I had looked too long. I pressed my palm to the glass. The surface felt warm now, pulsing faintly, like it had a heartbeat. On the other side, my reflection did the same. Only this time it didn't match my movement. It smiled, softly, kindly, and whispered, "I'll take it from here." Then the mirror cracked. Light poured through, swallowing everything, the hallway, the faces, my thoughts, the air itself, until all that was left was a single reflection, calm, breathing, alive. When the woman at the front desk came to clean the next morning, room 7 was empty. The bed was perfectly made, but the mirror, which had once been smooth and clear, now bore a single handprint pressed deep into the glass, one that never faded, no matter how hard she tried to wipe it away. That night, a new guest checked in. He said his name was Eli. He looked tired but relieved. When he smiled, his reflection didn't move. I don't remember the first time I truly felt fear, the kind that presses down in your chest and makes every breath feel heavy. But I remember the summer of 1998. I was 9, wedged into the back seat of my dad's old Chevy Blazer, Hannah asleep against my shoulder, hair damp from a motel pool 2 towns back. The desert twilight stretched endlessly past the windows, muted oranges fading into dusky purples. The trip had been long, from Sacramento through scattered Nevada towns, each stop blending into the next. Diners with cracked booths, gas stations with dusty cassette tapes and faded postcards. Dad was silent most of the way, jaw tight, eyes scanning the road. Mom tried to fill the quiet with music, a scratched Don Henley tape occasionally pointing out the sunset painting the trees in fire-colored streaks. But by the time we neared River Pines, the air had grown heavy, and the road seemed to stretch longer than it should. We weren't supposed to stay at the motel. Our reservation was at a chain motel down the highway. But when we arrived, the AC was broken, and Dad, too tired to argue, pulled into the gravel lot of the first place that showed a blinking red vacancy sign beneath tall pines. The building looked frozen in time, wood siding warped and fading, the parking lot nearly empty except for a lone pickup covered with a tarp. The neon sign flickered unevenly, casting a sickly glow across the gravel. Mom whispered, "Something about this place feels off." Dad ignored her and got the keys from the clerk, a shadowy figure behind glass. We carried our bags into room 112. The smell hit first, wet carpet mixed with bleach, old detergent, and faint cigarette smoke. The green rug left fuzz on our socks. 2 sagging double beds were covered with comforters stiff, and smelling of years. A crooked photograph of Lake Tahoe hung above the headboard, its frame tilted, casting an odd shadow that stretched across the ceiling. A microwave sat in the corner, its door jammed, next to a boxy TV that picked up only static-filled channels. We ate cup noodles for dinner. Hannah, clutching her stuffed elephant, fell asleep quickly. Mom lingered by the door, staring through the peephole. I couldn't sleep. Not yet. The faint hum of the hallway vending machine seeped through the walls, steady and alive. At 1:15 a.m., my throat dry, I stepped into the hallway in my Batman pajamas. The dim sconces cast long shadows. All doors were closed. None had chains. The vending machine at the far end buzzed like a dying streetlight, and then I heard it. A laugh. Soft, hollow, offbeat, wrong. It came from room 103. I froze. And then I saw him. He was crouched low, rocking slightly on his heels, arms dangling loosely. A man, maybe in his 40s, with thick glasses that caught the dim hallway light, and a mustache curled faintly at the ends. His hair seemed damp, plastered close to his scalp, though the poor lighting made it hard to tell. But it wasn't just how he looked. It was the way he moved, or rather, didn't fully move. He stayed crouched, swaying slightly, as if the hallway itself had molded to his posture. At first, he didn't look at me. His gaze was past my shoulder toward room 112, our room. I couldn't explain why that made my stomach twist harder. Then slowly, impossibly slowly, he tilted his head. His eyes slid over to mine, and his grin stretched unnaturally wide, as if it had been held that way for years. "You're up late," he whispered. The words scraped through the silence of the hallway, soft but sharp, a rasping breath of sound that should not have existed at that hour. "Want to play a hallway game?" I stepped back. My bare feet stuck slightly to the green carpet. Each step felt like moving through thick air. My legs shook, but my mind screamed to move, to run. The vending machine at the end of the hall buzzed louder, each hum hammering against my ears. Panic finally broke through. I spun around and ran full speed back to our room. The door slammed behind me, the latch rattling violently. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. I dove into the bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. Mom stirred, half asleep. "Matt, what's wrong?" "There was a man," I whispered. In the hall, smiling. Dad, already awake, peeked through the peephole, stepped into the hallway for a few seconds, then returned. "Nothing out there," he muttered. "Probably some drunk wandering." I didn't argue. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening. The vending machine's buzz continued all night, louder than before, a relentless hum that seemed alive. Every shadow on the walls shifted and flickered in my peripheral vision. I couldn't sleep. By morning, the exhaustion was a heavy fog over all of us. Breakfast in the lobby was dry muffins, bruised apples, and lukewarm juice. Hannah chewed quietly, looking small and fragile. I wandered to a corkboard near the office. It held brochures for lake tours and hiking trips, but one photograph slipped partially free. Sun-faded, curled at the edges, dated July 1978. A group of motel staff posed in front of the office. In the back row, crouched behind a woman holding a clipboard, was him. Same glasses, same mustache, same grin. I froze. My stomach lurched. I tugged at Mom's sleeve and pointed. She blinked, staring at the photo for a long moment. Then she whispered sharply, "We're leaving. Now." The gravel lot felt unreal beneath our shoes as we loaded the car. No one said a word. Even Hannah, normally full of chatter, stayed silent. It was as if we all knew some part of that night was too dangerous to speak aloud. The highway stretched ahead, endless pines blurring together as the blazer hummed beneath us. Silence settled like dust over the car. Dad gripped the wheel, knuckles pale. Hannah, clutching her stuffed elephant, sat quietly in the back. I stared at my own reflection in the window, pale and wide-eyed as though the hallway and the man were still pressed against me from behind. Mom finally spoke, her voice low and careful, as if saying the words too loudly might summon what we had just left behind. "When I was your age," she said, "my parents stopped here once, returning from Reno. I woke in the night and saw a man in the hallway. Same glasses, same mustache, same smile." I turned to look at her, stunned. "But that was 20 years ago," she finished softly, folding her hands in her lap. "I never told anyone. I thought it was a dream, or my imagination." Dad let out a short, sharp breath through his nose, shaking his head. "You're scaring the kids," he muttered. "Some drunk wandering the halls, that's all." Mom didn't respond. She just stared out the window, her reflection dark and unreadable in the glass. Even Hannah, who had slept through the encounter, seemed to sense the tension. She didn't speak, didn't fidget, just hugged her stuffed elephant tighter. It was as if all of us had tacitly agreed. Some things weren't to be spoken aloud. Years passed. Birthdays, school plays, family trips. They blurred. But that night stayed lodged in my memory, sharper than most real experiences. Every so often, Mom's gaze would linger on me, a shadow of understanding and warning in her eyes. And I, in turn, never told her that I couldn't sleep in motels without checking the hallways. Never told her I avoided vending machines after dark. By the time I reached college, I tried to convince myself it was just a childhood memory, twisted by imagination. Yet fear is a funny thing. It doesn't fade when you rationalize it. Every time I checked into a motel, the instinct returned. The halls looked narrower, the lights dimmer. The humming of a vending machine sounded like it had grown teeth. I began noticing patterns. Rooms near the end of hallways always made my stomach knot. Stairwells felt like traps. And for some reason, photographs of staff or old groups of people unsettled me, especially if someone in them crouched unnaturally, grinning. I realized then that fear isn't always about what's present. Sometimes it's about what lingers, what has imprinted itself on memory, and what your body remembers long after your mind tries to forget. Even decades later, that instinct remained. Some warnings, I learned, are timeless. They linger in the air, in the hum of electricity, in the subtle creak of a door. Some fears are inherited not in blood but in memory, and some shadows never leave. By sophomore year, curiosity finally outweighed caution. I spent nights alone in the library poring over town archives and microfilm reels. Most of it was ordinary: parades, traffic reports, community announcements. But then I found something that stopped me cold. 7-year-old girl missing from Desert Shade Motel, last seen near room 103. The article was brief, stark, and chilling. Her parents had reported her missing in the middle of the night. Police searched the grounds, questioned locals, but no trace was found. No suspect was ever identified. No resolution. She simply vanished. Alongside the text was a sketch of a man, glasses thick enough to distort his eyes, a faintly curled mustache, neutral expression, but the posture betrayed him, crouched slightly, unnatural, as if he had been observed in motion. My blood ran cold. The sketch looked exactly like the man I had seen crouched in the hallway, rocking slightly on his heels, smiling at me across the carpet decades before. I spent hours staring at that clipping. My mind raced, piecing together fragments of memory. The vending machine hum, the crooked photo in the lobby, Mom's whispered confession. The patterns lined up too perfectly to be coincidence. That night, dreams brought him back. The hallway stretched longer than it should, the fluorescent lights flickering, doors closed tight. And there he was, crouched at the far end, smiling, glasses catching the glow. Only this time, the missing girl appeared too, standing stiffly in front of him, her expression blank and scared. I woke drenched in sweat, the metallic taste of fear on my tongue. Since then, motels have never felt neutral to me. I check doors and locks obsessively. I avoid stairwells, vending machines, and hallway corners. Even faint echoes of laughter or the hum of machinery trigger the memory. The warning drilled deep into me at 9. The Desert Shade Motel is gone now. Its number disconnected. No recent reviews, no trace. Yet the memory thrives in my mind. The instinct remains, a constant reminder. Some things leave imprints that time cannot erase. And I never go into a hallway after midnight without thinking of him crouched at the end, rocking, smiling, watching. Because some warnings, once learned, never fade. Some threats are timeless. And if he notices I remember, I know I will see that grin again, wide and unyielding, waiting as he always does. Fear, I've learned, isn't always about what's real. Sometimes it's about what persists, what your body knows long before your mind allows itself to acknowledge it. And some lessons, learned in the quiet hours of a motel hallway, cannot be forgotten. The year I turned 30, I decided Christmas should be quiet. Work had drained every ounce of warmth from me, and the city's neon buzz felt like sandpaper on my nerves. I wanted air that smelled of pine and wood smoke, a place where snow could muffle the constant ringing in my head. Scrolling through old forums one night, I found a forgotten listing. Pine Hollow Motel, Cabin 3. The post looked ancient, its photos blurred, but something about it tugged at me. A log cabin buried under evergreens, a porch lamp glowing through dusk. I booked it on impulse. The drive from Denver took longer than I'd expected. By late afternoon, the highway had thinned to a ribbon, the mountains bruised with stormlight. When I turned onto a narrow road, cell signal blinked out, and the world became only my headlights slicing mist and the crunch of tires over packed snow. Twilight painted the drifts pale rose. Pines pressed close, their limbs black against the sky. Every bend felt like stepping farther from the life I knew. Finally, a weather-beaten sign emerged from the gloom. Pine Hollow, its paint cracked and flaking. The parking area was half buried in snow, holding one lonely car with frost-furred windows. The main building crouched under icicles. A single bulb burned above the porch, casting a yellow island in the dark. Inside, heat wrapped around me, scented faintly of cedar and old paper. A woman, 60, maybe older, rose from behind the desk. Her silver hair was wound tight at the nape, and her eyes looked as though they had not seen much laughter. "Cabin 3, she said, voice papery, sliding an actual brass key across the counter. "Stay on the path. Don't wander the woods after dark." The cabin waited at the end of a narrow trail. Snow creaked beneath my boots. Inside, I found walls of polished, knotty pine, a wood stove set on river stones, and a wide window framing an ocean of trees. At first, the silence was perfect, so deep it felt like being wrapped in wool. I made tea, unpacked, and let my shoulders drop for the first time in months. But when night thickened, a new rhythm bled through the hush, faint, deliberate knocks along the wall behind the bed. I told myself it was only branches brushing the siding. Yet each time I held my breath, the knocks crept on, spaced like footsteps stopping near the closet door. But sleep never quite claimed me. Around 1 a.m., a draft slithered from the closet seam, though the stove still breathed steady warmth. Irritation wrestled with unease. I got up, swung the door wide. Coats hung limply, and a wool blanket drooped from a hook. Nothing moved. Back under the quilt, I'd just begun to relax when a new sound trickled through the walls, a murmur shaped like a woman's voice. The syllables were smudged, as if carried through deep timber. Low, urgent. Morning spilled pale over the forest, brushing away the strangeness like mist. I stomped a loop around the property, photographing deer prints etched in snow. Pine needles glittered with frost, and for a moment I felt foolish for letting shadows spook me. Margaret served coffee in the main house, her hand steady despite the tremor in her voice when I mentioned whispers. "Wind tunnels," she said too quickly, and shifted to talk about an approaching storm. By afternoon, clouds sagged heavy as wet wool. I spent hours by the stove reading, but a quiet pressure filled the cabin, as though eyes studied me from just beyond the window panes. At dusk, movement snagged my gaze, a pale silhouette among the pines motionless against bark. I blinked hard and it was gone, leaving only falling flakes. Night brought sharper sounds, knocks thudding above the beams, then a slow scrape, like nails testing wood. I held my useless phone, thumb hovering over the dead signal bar. There was no one to call. I sat rigid until gray light seeped through the curtains. By morning, snow had sealed the world to a white hush. I trudged to the main house, expecting to find tracks from the other guest. There were none, only my own zigzag prints. Inside, the lobby smelled of burnt coffee and old varnish. Margaret was absent. On the counter, an open register lay yellowed with age. I skimmed the entries. No handwriting since 2012, except for my neat signature from yesterday. A knot formed behind my ribs. Back in cabin 3, I searched systematically. Under bed, behind stove, beneath rug. Nothing, until I crouched by the closet and rapped the baseboard. A hollow answered. Using my pocket knife, I pried at the plank until it lifted, revealing a cavity stuffed with brittle linens. Beneath them lay a tarnished locket and a driver's license. The photo showed a smiling young woman, hair wild with static. The expiration date, 2011. I carried the items through wind-swirled snow. Margaret stood at a window, face ashen. When I set the trinkets on the desk, she recoiled. "Put them back," she whispered. "Who was she?" I asked. Her hands twisted the hem of her cardigan. "Ellie. She helped here winters. One night she walked out and never returned. We searched, but the forest kept her." Her voice cracked. "Best leave the dead alone." Her brittle fear rooted me, but questions throbbed. Why hide her things? Why leave cabin 3 open at all? The storm arrived in earnest that evening, smothering the motel in white. Wind clawed at the roof, rattling shutters like bones. The lights flickered, then died, leaving firelight licking walls. I tried reading, but the air thickened with watchfulness. The wood popped, sighs trembled along the window glass. A sudden thud above made me flinch, the unmistakable weight of something crossing the roof. Grabbing my coat, I stepped into blinding snow. I circled the cabin. No ladder, no prints, nothing but storm. Inside, the closet gaped wide, though I'd latched it. The locket and license lay on the floor as if thrown from the dark. A smell of damp earth seeped out. Then a voice rasped up from the hidden cavity. "Help me." The words vibrated through planks, hoarse and urgent. My pulse thundered. I shoved the panel shut, wedged the heavy chair against it, and sat gripping the poker, eyes fixed on the wood until dawn bruised the sky. Sunrise revealed a fragile calm. I packed in a frantic haze, heart hammering at every creak. Margaret waited at the desk, face drawn into weary lines. When I handed her the key, she searched my eyes. "Did she speak?" she asked. I hesitated. "Yes." She exhaled, almost a sigh of relief. "Ellie doesn't want to hurt anyone. She just can't bear to be forgotten." I didn't stay to hear more. Snow sprayed from my tires as I fled down the narrow road. When cell bars finally flickered back, I booked the nearest motel. That night, sleep fractured into dreams, cabin 3 drowning in drifts, the closet door easing open, Ellie stepping forward, skin frosted gray, lips moving in a silent plea. Weeks later, curiosity gnawed me raw. I searched every database for Ellie Pine Hollow. Nothing. No missing person report, no archived news, as though she'd been erased. Sometimes, on cold nights, I hear a slow tap behind my apartment wall, tracing a line toward the closet. I leave the lights burning, but it doesn't hush the sound. Real horror isn't gore or snarling monsters. It's a memory with teeth. The ghost of a girl still buried somewhere in the dark timber, waiting for someone to remember her name, and wondering if one evening she'll step fully from the snow and claim the life I brought back from Pine Hollow. I used to think a few days in the mountains could smooth any fracture, as if distance alone could mend what city life wears thin. After 12 months of late-night spreadsheets, my father's slow recovery from surgery, and a relationship stalled between affection and exhaustion, I believed quiet was medicine. The plan wasn't mine. Elise sent a midnight message with a single link: Lantern Lake Motel, cabins on the Wyoming High Ridge, perfect for unwinding. Her brother Liam and his girlfriend Sarah wanted to tag along. 4 people, 1 borrowed SUV, and maybe a reset. We left Seattle before dawn. Coffee steamed in travel mugs while the freeway unwound toward slate-colored peaks. Liam cataloged the fish he'd catch. Sarah shuffled playlists in search of a song that could hold the road's widening silence. Elise rode shotgun, cheek pressed to glass, our fingers laced carefully, like even touch needed negotiation. By late afternoon, we traded asphalt for gravel. Pines hemmed a drive that ended at a cedar motel crouched by a lake. Bronze wind chimes hung from its porch, still despite a breeze. A lantern above the entry swayed on its own. Inside, a receptionist about our age looked up from a ledger. Her wool cardigan was buttoned 1 loop off, and her words arrived a second late, as if she were hearing herself from somewhere distant. 2 suites, she said, sliding brass keys across the counter. They share a sitting room. Lock the inner door after dark. The weather here doesn't behave. The room smelled of pine and faded quilts. Windows faced the lake, where drizzle stitched the water into silver ripples. Between our suites waited a narrow lounge, a sunken sofa, a table cluttered with trail maps, and a third door painted the same green as the wall, sealed by a chain and padlock. That evening, mist rose from the lake like smoke from cold coals. We drank spiced cider from chipped mugs while Liam spun stories about trout big enough to pull us in. For the first time in months, Elise's laughter rang without strain. I let myself believe the weekend might work. When the sky turned charcoal, the lantern over the porch guttered. Thunder grumbled behind the hills. We retreated inside, leaving a lamp glowing in the sitting room. My phone already read, "No service." Elise seemed oddly relieved. Rain hammered the shingles while we drifted to sleep. Sometime after 2 a.m., I woke to silence so complete it felt deliberate. The lamp in the lounge still burned, but a thinner, bluish light pooled at the base of our door. A sound followed. A sigh of hinges, then 3 delicate taps. Elise stirred, eyes wide in the dim. Through the cracked door, the lounge looked untouched, except for the green door. Its chain quivered, metal links shivering as if something breathed against them. "Maybe Liam," I whispered, though the words sounded unsure. No reply came. Only a faint drag across wood, like cloth or skin sliding. "Don't," Elise said when I took a step forward. The trembling stopped, but I couldn't settle. I crept to Liam and Sarah's room. Their door was closed, the gap beneath dark. Inside, beds lay smooth, bags untouched, phone silent on the table. It felt staged, like a room prepared for strangers. Back in the lounge, a gust blew through an open window I didn't remember unlocking, scattering yellowed maps. Among them fluttered a slip of damp paper in looping script. "Stay where the lantern shines." I wedged a chair against our door. Elise and I waited while the storm slackened into a breathless hush. At 3, the lamp dimmed until the room drowned in blackness. Then came steps, slow, deliberate, across the floor. They halted just outside. A whisper pressed through the seam of wood. "Lanterns fade first." The knob twisted once, twice, then stilled. We didn't sleep until dawn smeared pale color across the lake. Morning arrived sharp and unnatural. The lake lay flat as stone, mirroring the sky with such precision it looked deeper than it was wide. No birds cut its surface. The padlock on the green door hung snapped. Beyond yawned a hallway, lined with mirrors that refused to reflect us, only a pearly haze. A smell of wet stone drifted out. Elise called softly for Liam and Sarah. Her voice sank into the mist without echo. Fear rooted in my chest. "We need help," I murmured, pulling her toward the stairs. Downstairs, reception stood empty. The ledger lay open. Under yesterday's date, our names marched in neat ink beside an unfilled column labeled "Departure." Outside, the SUV waited, but its tires rested in a lace of frost though the sun had warmed the air. The gravel road shimmered like heat waves, though a cool wind licked the pines. We packed in silence. Elise lingered, staring at the motel's shadow stretching far beyond its walls, edges unnervingly sharp. I wanted to search, to shout for our friends, but something in that fog-lined corridor had looked back at me, without eyes. Back in Seattle, normality insisted on itself. Liam's apartment was orderly but hollow, as if someone had stepped out mid-life. Sarah's parents hadn't heard from her. Police filed reports, tapped keyboards, and eyed me like grief blurred my memory. Elise avoided the subject entirely. She submerged herself in work, then retreated behind a quiet so heavy it bent the air. Sometimes I'd find her standing at the window, hands tight at her sides, as though waiting for a signal only she could hear. I kept combing our phones and camera rolls, hunting for proof we'd been at Lantern Lake. There were no pictures, no GPS logs beyond the state line. Even the SUV's odometer matched the mileage we'd recorded before leaving. Nights were worse. I'd wake to find the faint smell of rain in our bedroom or catch a sliver of bluish light slipping under the door. Once I heard a single tap against the wall, 3 beats, slow, patient. The police called weeks later. Search teams had combed the ridge but found only an abandoned motel with boards nailed over its windows, dust sealing the threshold. According to county records, Lantern Lake Motel had closed almost 20 years ago. I've tried to map what happened, to anchor it with logic, but memory bends like heat above pavement. When I close my eyes, I see the lantern over that porch swinging in air that held no wind. I hear water tapping against a dock in a rhythm just shy of language. Elise speaks even less now. Some evenings she drifts toward the door as if pulled. I catch her wrist and for a moment her eyes clear, but only for a moment. She always asks the same thing. Did we lock it? I don't know if she means the chain on the green door or something larger. I've started writing everything down in case whatever waits by that lake wants to unspool our memories completely. Yet words falter. When I try to describe the figure I almost saw beyond the mist, a shape built from shadow, holding a lantern that dimmed even as it shone. Sometimes when the house settles at night, a voice curls through the dark like smoke through keyholes. Lanterns fade first, and I wonder how long before that quiet knock returns, before another innocent weekend promises to heal what it really means to claim.